We begin with urgent breaking news out of Ivory Coast. In a stunning turn of events, thousands of citizens have taken to the streets, demanding that President Alassane Ouattara step down from power. Inspired by the leadership style of Ibrahim Traoré in neighboring Burkina Faso, Ivorians have decided that enough is enough. Since yesterday, the streets of Abidjan and beyond have been filled with chants, banners, and defiance against a government accused of betraying its own constitution. What is happening in Ivory Coast? The nation once praised as West Africa's beacon of stability is now at a dangerous crossroads. Tensions exploded after Ouattara's bid for a controversial fourth term, a move seen by many as a direct assault on democracy itself. The constitution, once celebrated as a safeguard against lifetime presidencies, has now become the center of a storm threatening to tear the country apart. On the morning of August 9, 2025, whispers of protests in Abidjan spread like wildfire. By midday, those whispers had turned into thunder. Entire neighborhoods poured into the streets, forming a sea of demonstrators that stretched through the city's arteries. Within hours, tens of thousands were united in a single demand: Ouattara must go. This was no ordinary protest. It was a nationwide uprising cutting across class, region, and political divisions. In the busy district of Yopougon, students abandoned their classrooms and carried placards declaring "No to dictatorship" and "Fourth term equals betrayal." In Plateau, the commercial heart of Abidjan, office workers and traders walked out in solidarity. Beyond the capital, towns like Bouake and Korhogo saw farmers blocking highways with burning tires and overturned trucks, choking vital supply lines. The movement had spilled far beyond city centers. Rural villages rose up too, showing that this was not just an urban revolt, but a truly national rebellion. Social media lit up with raw, unfiltered scenes of defiance. In one clip, a group of women gathered outside a police station, banging drums and daring officers to confront them. In another, young men scaled a government building and unfurled a giant banner declaring, "Democracy or nothing." The spirit was unmistakable. Ivorians believed this was their last chance to defend their democracy. Perhaps most remarkable was the unity on display. Political rivals who had spent years at each other's throats marched side by side. Former President Laurent Gbagbo's Pachi party members walked shoulder to shoulder with supporters of Henry Konan Bedai's PDCIRDA. Civil society groups, student unions, women's associations, and transport collectives all joined forces in a way never seen before. This was not just about party politics. It was about protecting the nation's very soul. And then came the moment that changed everything: hesitation within the security forces. Police used tear gas in some areas, but the crowds regrouped within minutes. Soldiers, instead of confronting demonstrators, were seen quietly speaking with them, even sympathizing with their cause. For a country scarred by past mutinies, the mere suggestion that the army might be divided was enough to send shockwaves through the political establishment. The risks were real. Journalists reported harassment, protesters faced arrests, and yet no one backed down. "We are not afraid anymore," one young man shouted, his face streaked with sweat and tear gas. "If we don't fight now, we won't have a country tomorrow." By nightfall, Abidjan's skyline was lit by the glow of burning barricades. The chants of resistance echoed deep into the night, proving that this uprising was not a passing outburst, but the beginning of something much larger and possibly irreversible. At the heart of it all lies a question bigger than one man's ambition. Has President Ouattara staged a coup against his own constitution? Ivorians say he has crossed a red line, twisting the law to cling to power. And so, the nation asks itself, what exactly does the Constitution allow, and how did one leader turn it into his personal weapon? In villages across Ivory Coast's north and west, daily struggles continue to define life. Children still trek miles just to fetch clean water, and farmers fight to sell their crops at fair prices. For many Ivorians, the much-celebrated prosperity of recent years feels like a distant illusion, visible to the outside world in glossy reports and skyscrapers, but never reaching the dinner tables of ordinary families. This sense of betrayal is most pronounced among the youth, who make up over 70% of the country's population. They were promised opportunity, modernization, and a future that matched the impressive GDP growth numbers splashed across headlines. Instead, they face crushing unemployment. Even university graduates find themselves locked out of formal jobs, forced instead into the informal economy, driving motorcycle taxis, selling on the streets, or working as day laborers. These young people, who should have been the beneficiaries of Ivory Coast's economic boom, now feel abandoned. Unsurprisingly, they have become the loudest voices in the protests, chanting not only against Ouattara's fourth-term bid, but against a system that has systematically excluded them. Adding fuel to the fire are corruption scandals that seem endless. Stories of bloated contracts, favoritism in government tenders, and outright theft by political elites dominate everyday conversations. To many, Ouattara's administration no longer looks like a steward of national progress. It looks like a gatekeeper protecting the privileges of a well-connected elite. The rural majority feels this betrayal most deeply. While Abidjan glitters with highways, malls, and towering buildings, much of the countryside is still stuck in neglect, crumbling roads, patchy electricity, and clinics that barely function. Cocoa farmers, who sustain Ivory Coast's position as the world's top cocoa producer, live on subsistence wages, often below the poverty line. "We feed the country, yet our children go to bed hungry," one farmer lamented on a local radio program. That disconnect between those who provide and those who profit has hardened resentment in the very regions that keep the national economy alive. This is why Ouattara's claim that growth and stability justify his continued leadership feels insulting to many Ivorians. Growth for whom? Stability for whom? To ordinary citizens, the president's pursuit of a fourth term is not about protecting the nation, but about preserving a privileged bubble that has never shared its wealth with the people. This anger is no longer just about inequality. It is about dignity. People feel their sacrifices have been ignored, their struggles dismissed, and their future stolen. That is why the slogan "democracy or nothing" resonates so powerfully. For many, democracy now represents not just political reform, but the only possible escape from decades of exclusion. Yet, the future of this crisis may hinge on one critical factor: the military. The streets may roar with anger, but in Ivory Coast, as in much of the region, the army ultimately holds the power to tip the scales. The pressing question is whether the armed forces will remain loyal to Ouattara or fracture under the same pressures, breaking public trust. The Ivorian army is far from a unified bloc. It is a layered institution, marked by competing loyalties, uneven pay, and memories of past mutinies. Understanding how each layer of the military sees this crisis is key to predicting what comes next. Start with the rank-and-file soldiers. Most of them come from the same impoverished backgrounds as the young protesters now filling the streets. Their salaries lag behind inflation, housing allowances are inconsistent, and many of the benefits promised after earlier uprisings never materialized. In recent weeks, soldiers' families have been spotted queuing at the same subsidized food outlets as civilians. Even army canteens have faced shortages. These daily frustrations create a quiet sense of empathy with the demonstrators, not outright disobedience yet, but an emotional closeness that can quickly harden into political preference. Then come the non-commissioned officers, or NCOs, the backbone of the army. They carry the memory of the 2014 to 2017 mutinies, when pay raises and promotions were used as bargaining chips. Those years taught them two painful lessons. Pressure works, but chaos comes at a high price. Today, NCOs are cautious. They dislike being ordered to repress civilians, but also fear the breakdown of discipline if a single unit breaks ranks. Their instinct is to slow down escalation, disperse crowds without bloodshed, rotate units to prevent fatigue, and insist on written orders before taking major action. At the top, senior commanders calculate differently. Their concerns are reputation, cohesion, and succession. A violent crackdown risks international condemnation and sanctions that could freeze military aid and equipment pipelines. Internally, it could split the force, with younger officers siding quietly with their troops rather than with the president. And looming over everything is succession. If Ouattara's position collapses, any commander who ties the army too tightly to him may find the institution weakened the day after. For this reason, the generals preferred to keep their options open, defend key state assets like the airport, fuel depots, and broadcast stations, but avoid all-out war with the streets. Geography plays a role too. Units based in Abidjan are directly exposed to the protests and carry the highest reputational risks. Those along the borders tasked with counter-smuggling and counterinsurgency argue against redeployment, warning it could leave dangerous security vacuums. This patchwork deployment makes it harder for the government to flood the capital with reinforcements. Intelligence reports already signal a reluctant force. Delays in assembling units, sudden equipment malfunctions, and requests for medical leave suggest soldiers are dragging their feet. Elite units tasked with protecting the presidency and critical infrastructure, however, remain loyal. The message is clear. The state can still defend its core, but extending control over the wider population will be costly and uncertain. Could this lead to a palace guard scenario, a narrow coup carried out by a small, loyal circle? Theoretically, yes. Loyalty exists in fragments. Speed is always an option. But what's missing is a credible civilian caretaker to stabilize the transition. Without that figure, any sudden military takeover risks plunging Ivory Coast into deeper chaos. That is why senior officers seem to prefer calibrated coercion, curfews in select districts, targeted arrests, and quiet signals to the opposition that the army will not sanction a bloodbath. Regional precedents add to their caution. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all saw coups launched with promises of stability, only for their armies to face budget shortfalls, isolation, and governance crises. Ivory Coast's commanders have studied these failures closely. They know that seizing power without a fiscal plan or external backing would saddle them with a collapsing state. That is a burden they are unwilling to bear. Which brings us to the outer ring of the crisis: external actors. If the military is buying time, who is using it? The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is usually quick to issue strong statements against unconstitutional power grabs. But this time, its silence is deafening. No urgent summits, no red lines, no clear stance against Ouattara's fourth term. To protesters, this silence looks like a green light for the president. To opposition leaders, it confirms their belief that ECOWAS protects presidents in suits but punishes soldiers in fatigues. Either way, the credibility of ECOWAS as a defender of democracy is crumbling. Then there is France, Ivory Coast's former colonial power and still its largest foreign partner. Paris has historically seen Abidjan as the anchor of its West African presence. But after being expelled from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, France is on fragile ground. It has reduced its military footprint in Ivory Coast but still relies on access to bases and economic contracts. For now, the Macron government is playing it safe, avoiding open criticism of Ouattara, while also refusing to endorse him outright. Ivorians, however, see this ambiguity as proof that foreign powers value cocoa and military bases more than democracy. Global financial institutions tread a similar line. The World Bank and IMF have heavily invested in Ivory Coast's success story, celebrating its growth as a model for Africa. Admitting democratic backsliding now would undermine years of glowing reports and shake investor confidence. And so, their statements stress stability and dialogue rather than accountability. Meanwhile, markets are already jittery. Bond yields are climbing. Cocoa futures swing wildly with every protest video, and foreign companies are quietly preparing exit strategies if supply chains collapse. Beyond governments and institutions, the crisis has also become a rallying point for African youth movements. From Dakar to Ouagadougou, activists are framing Ivory Coast's uprising as part of a larger continental fight against entrenched elites and exclusion. Hashtags linking Abidjan to protests across the region are gaining traction, creating a sense of shared struggle. The symbolism is powerful. If Ivorians succeed in forcing accountability, others in Togo, Senegal, or Cameroon might be emboldened to do the same. All these external dynamics shape Ouattara's choices. If ECOWAS in France remain passive, if investors and lenders prioritize continuity, he may feel safe doubling down. But if Pan-African solidarity continues to amplify Ivorian voices, the reputational cost of clinging to power will only grow. And so, Ivory Coast now stands at a crossroads. A president determined to stretch constitutional boundaries. A people unwilling to accept it, a military cautious but restless. and a region whose silence may prove decisive. The question that began with protests on August 9th, how did West Africa's brightest success story unravel so quickly, has now expanded. Will this be the moment Ivorians redefine democracy for the region? Or will it become yet another story where silence abroad enabled repression at home?